It's just great to see you, man. I can't even say like, yeah, wow, like I got Josiah Woodson on my podcast. It's like a dream come true. um, but yeah, man, I'm wondering if you could talk. We talked a little bit just a second ago, but like maybe you can go a little bit more in depth with your answer. How are you doing with the quarantine, the isolation, everything else going on, man?
Um, I'll say, let's see. The hardest part is for me is not being able to see my family
Sure.
because I live thousands of miles away from them. So living in isolation away from them is it's probably the only hard part for me, really, because if I'm perfectly honest, me being a super introvert, like I'm really happy to just stay home and just I get to practice my music all day and nobody can be like, "You're not leaving your house, you're a bad person." Like, no, we're not. We're all not supposed to leave. So all of a sudden, my natural inclination becomes what everyone has to do. So
Sh- Sure,
it's
sure.
been fun.
But I think too, I see a lot of what you've. I mean, we stay in contact, of course, but I see a lot of what you do on social media and what you put out. I mean, you seem to be just constantly active already on all these platforms. Maybe you could speak a bit to that and just like, yeah, I guess now that's the way everybody's kind of communicating or expressing themselves through music. Speak on that,
Right.
please.
Right. I mean, I put some stuff out on Instagram and Facebook pretty often. YouTube less often because the way I do it is I like the YouTube stuff to be kind of a cut above, like a little kind of more input in there. Whereas on Instagram, I'll just, throw my phone up and put something up sometimes. But yeah, I mean, natural creatives, which I'm lucky to be part of that group, but we just, we have to put stuff out. So the quarantine didn't really slow me down at all. Actually, it sped me up in terms of what I was able to put out because I was able to focus on, you know, just the music side of things. I didn't have to go out and, do concerts and teach and stuff like that. So it's been easier. It's the quarantine has facilitated that aspect of my life that was always there.
Sure, sure. I think, yeah, yeah. Mention, but curious. Maybe you could plug some of your projects. Like, what are some of the things you were doing pre-quarantine that you'd like to plug? This is the opportunity.
Oh, I'm not a good plugger. I gotta shed my plugging chops. But the there is one thing that actually it stopped, which I'll be able to get back to once we get out of this. But so I have one album out that came out around 3 years ago, Sweet Elemental. But this year I'm gonna record a second album. So
Okay.
pretty much all the music is done, but there's one song that I just started to write that I'm really excited about. So hopefully I can use this time to finish it. But that album should be recorded. It would have been recorded this month, but so I'll record it as soon as we get out of the confinement and try to at least release it by maybe Christmas, maybe something like that. So the
Hmm.
second album should be out. Um, I have two projects. One of them is the band that album is going to be of. That's quintessential. And then the other project is called JWP, and JWP is sort of more of a here they call it musique actuelle, and that's just kind of more on the pop side, less kind of purist modern jazz. For me, the only real difference is there's more funky grooves and there's a singer. That's the biggest difference. There's still improvisation. There's still funky time changes and funky chords that kind of change all over the place.
Right.
So, but it's a different type of project. So those are my two things that I'm really liking to do for myself. Outside of that, I'm just playing with people around here. I'm lucky enough to be in Mario Canonge's quintet with Michel Zanino, and there's some real killers in that one. Mario is a really big name in the French jazz scene, especially the Entier jazz scene,
Hmm.
Guadeloupe and Martinique. And then I also play pretty regularly with China Moses, who a lot of people know just on her own merits, but she totally merits that. She's a beast. But she comes from a beast. She comes from Dee Dee Bridgewater, so that's where she's coming from, and that's her mother. And we had a whole bunch of concerts and shows to do that were all canceled. That's the biggest. Those are the biggest cancellations. Besides my own project, we had a couple festivals to play at, one in Romania and one in the south of France, and both of those got canceled. But for China, we were supposed to be in Poland this week. I think we had gigs in Germany. It was all over the place, and those unfortunately got canceled. But I'm looking forward to getting back to that after the confinement.
Sure, sure. But yeah, man. Um, yeah, I mean those are all just great projects. I'm like so pleased you being like also an expat living abroad from the US. Just I look at your example, and I'm like, dude, this this dude. But I want to speak also. I'm gonna get a little deeper now.
Okay.
But I think it's funny because you talk about these gigs getting canceled and everything. I know I mean, I can do this. I think we all do this as musicians sometimes, but there's a kind of side of this thing, where our self worth sometimes gets caught up in our what we're doing. So, for
Yep.
instance, when you got a lot of gigs, when money's hitting your bank account, like no one's business, and and you just kind of, it's easy at that moment to be like, yeah, like I the self worth, it's easy to kind of associate what's going on in the outside world with who you actually are and kind of feel good about it. But the minute that shifts, it's kind of this moment where we're all kind of asking ourselves, who are we? Um, and on some level, maybe not super deep, but I mean, you talk about just being able to adapt pretty seamlessly to a lot of what's going on. But maybe I'm wondering if you could speak to that, just that kind of how we identify ourselves. How do you, in kind of this time, and maybe some stuff you've done to kind of try to look within.
That's a real interesting one for me because I hadn't really thought of it in those terms.
Mhm.
Because for me, the my identity is really tied into how well I can play. Now that
Sure.
I'm not saying that's ideal. not not trying to put that off as this is how people should be, but like it's definitely my challenge, that's where my identity and self-worth is from. So with the quarantine, my identity hasn't taken any specific hit having to stay at home, I'll tell you. But the hit that it does take is when I hear other players and they're dope and they're killing, I'm like, I need to practice more. Like I put out a video and we try not to count the likes. I mean, that's my sort of, that's where my ego gets kind of in there, like trying to not to count the likes, not to look at, okay, how many views am I getting on this platform?
Right.
Are people liking it? Because the thing for me is sometimes I'll put like tons of hours into a video. Like I did a video where we played Actual Proof. And the way that I did it, I was like, okay,
Oh
we're
yeah.
going to do it differently because, it's all quarantine. So it's all like remote stuff, which I had already done a bunch of. But I was like, okay, now the thing you lose when you do these videos, because we're all remote, is the communication between each other. So what if we do it in a way that gains a little bit of that back? And so I was like, okay, basically, we're going to record the rhythm section, and then the saxophone will play over it. Then we'll re-record the rhythm section, listening to what the saxophone and the keyboard are playing on their solos, and then they'll re-record over that. See, so it's like a multi-tiered way to do it. Basically, I put a bunch of time in this thing. It took like 2 weeks to do, with everybody's schedule.
Sure.
And I got in Final Cut Pro. I put it together, HD quality, and people were like, I got like a couple likes. Yeah, I like that song. I've heard that before. Click. And then the other day, I think I posted, like, I just put my camera, my phone up in front of me, and I just played something stupid on my guitar just to play it. And people were like, oh, I really like that. You know what I mean? So that's where my ego gets kind of caught up into it. It's like I put all these hours into this one and it got like a like. And then I put none into this one and it got like 50.
Hmm.
So and then listening to other people play, and it's like, oh man, that's really dope. I need to practice because I want to be able to do that. That's where my ego is kind of, in play, or that's where the challenges are for me.
Yeah, I think what you describe, it sounds so much like what I go through as well. I mean, I would say, you know, sometimes that kind of can look like, you know, when you hear someone who's dope on the other side of your computer screen, and you're just like, man, there's a little bit of what I would say is like compare and despair. Like that can happen as well.
Yep.
I think as long as, you know, there's a healthy sense of, you know, I think that's okay to have that feeling for, but it's not okay to linger in it. I think
Right.
it's
Right.
a sense of, you know, like it's kind of then a calling to, you know, what do you know, what's your statement? Kind of like the I dare you thing. Um, I hear some very famous musicians kind of refer to like jazz being I dare you.
Mm.
But you know, but I think, you know, yeah, man. Within all of it, it's rather, you know, it's rather humbling, I think, you know, what's going on right now. And I would say, yeah, just speaking to what you're talking about too, I think sometimes these organic moments, you know, where you just talk about just putting up your phone and just having, you know, with your guitar and just kind of doing something small. I think that the that element of things has, it has a bigger impact, or it can have as big an impact as anything major you do. Like what you,
It can. It can. It and it's a challenge to figure out what's what, you know, and what gets play and what doesn't. Do you know what I mean?
sure.
Like as independent musicians, we always had to have several hats on, but like never more than now, because so much technology is at our fingers. We have to be our own, not only musician and teachers, right? But
Hmm.
we also have to be our own tech people. You know, we have to learn Logic, and we have to learn how to edit and Final Cut and all these different programs. And then we have to be our own marketers and our own press, you know, attaches, you know, to put our stuff out there and to get connections. So it's like there's a lot of hats that we have to put on, and it's a challenge to kind of um, manage how much time you put into each of those positions.
Yeah, I think too. I mean, I think it's, you know, but I do like this pause button we've kind of hit right now as a society, where it is slowing down, where it's slowed down a lot, with regard to just, you know, because I know the travel schedules, and also just not even the schedule so much. It's more just those. I mean, I feel that too, kind of what you described, just kind of being away from family, when I'm traveling or when I'm doing stuff for work, even if it's just a one off, like going down and coming back. It can be very, yeah, it's very, there's something about it. I mean, it's just like, you know, on some levels, I can't even name the number of times I'd be like after the gig or in between sets, I'm like, man, I wish I was just home right now, you know,
Hmm.
because when the music's not happening, it's like, you know, I wish it was, you know, I would, you know, it's kind of that I wish. And now that it's kind of like that, that I'm just home, it's like, huh, tons of time. But I think, you know, this is a very unique opportunity. And that being said, it is a unique opportunity where I'm seeing there's just so much creative energy flowing out of every kind of corner of the world right now.
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe speak to some of that. I mean, you talk about collaborating with other musicians abroad, but maybe speak a little bit more to that, like which, what kind of projects you see kind of coming into play, and also maybe speak also, because you mentioned before just this idea of being able to try to find an organic way to have it feel like, even though there's not that personal interaction that happens, like how you kind of, like maybe speaking a bit more to some more ideas you might have around mimicking that.
Um, well, the first thing is the world has taken this pause, but what I felt in our community, the musicians, I feel like we kind of sped up. Do you know what I mean? Like, because all of a sudden we had no external gigs to do, so we can focus on the things that we really want to do and put out videos. And with the technology that we have
Mm-hmm.
at our disposal, that let us do that. So I saw a ramping up of how much content is coming out of creatives, not just musicians, also comedians. I follow a lot of them, and dancers and other artists. There's a lot of creative content coming out of all of us, and it kind of jumped up. So for me, in a sense, I'm feeling just a little bit more pressure to put out quality videos or quality music on the platforms.
Right,
So
right.
That's an interesting dynamic. In terms of the communication and the things that we lose as musicians, not being right next to each other, I'm not exactly sure how to get through that. I know most of these platforms have a big delay between the sound and the video, so you can't really play with somebody. Do
Sure.
you know what I mean? And have them hear you play with them. You can play with them and then cut yourself off so that you're communicating with them, but they're not communicating with you, or vice versa, however you want to think about it. Do you know what I
Sure.
mean?
And
But in terms of the technology, until we have an internet that works at the speed of light, we're not gonna. I don't see a way around that for me right now. But I think we just have to explore different ways to be creative within the bounds that we have.
totally. And I think, you're someone who I feel like really exemplifies that too. Um, but I want to backtrack just a little bit and talk a bit about, Oaktown.
Yeah.
Because I think you're the first person from Oaktown I've interviewed actually, no, I interviewed Richard.
Okay. Nice.
Already, but I haven't released it yet. Uh, but I got to do that soon. But I wanted to ask a bit about like how Oaktown and how your musical upbringing kind of how influences you and kind of what you're doing now in Paris, a bit more. You talked a bit about, just the different projects you're associated with now, but maybe if you could describe just kind of just because, just how, being an expat, how, your upbringing kind of influences you now as an expat living abroad.
Right.
Yeah. Speak.
Right. Um, it was Oaktown, but even more than Oaktown, it was Khalil. That
Yeah.
was the whole thing.
Yeah.
Khalil was the man that I met that put me into music and put me into so-called jazz. Um, and he quickly became my mentor and like a second father to me. So his influence will be with me till the day I die, because
Yeah.
the things that I learned from him, from his words and from how he showed me, and then just from watching him be a musician, it's in the, it's all the way down to my core.
Sure.
Is his influence. And so just in general, I mean, I can speak on a few points. One is being an expat. So the tradition of this music, all Black American music, comes from us in America. And now even in America, the sort of the nests or the places where the music comes out of, if you want to say New Orleans, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, those places where the music is born and then comes out and sees the rest of the world. Um, Being in Europe removes me even farther from those spots and even farther from the tradition. And more than that, it puts me in an environment where our traditions and the music is translated, and there's a language barrier, even though it's music, even though it's notes, even though we're using the Western scale, the system, it's translated, so there's an accent with it. There's way less connection with the tradition, and there's way less understanding that you're not connecting with the tradition, way less understanding of what we're doing. An example is, I'll be walking around here and just looking at people and how they dress, and some of them dress a little bit towards the hip hop, thing, and they'll wear these baseball caps because we wear baseball caps. But they'll have like
Yeah.
my dude was wearing a Detroit Red Wings hat, and I was like, "Oh, you're a fan of hockey?" And he's like, "Nah, it's red. It goes with my fit." And it's like it's so much that, and it's like that's cool. We definitely put hats on in the state to go with our fit, but we're less inclined to put a hat on of a team we're not a fan of. That's why I know with a new era, all the hats come out in several different colors. Like you have a Cincinnati Reds hat that's like purple and gray. Why? Because my outfit is purple and gray, but I'm repping my team. Do you see? So there's a tradition and a connection with what's happening. Whereas here, a lot of that tradition is lost because it's just there's a mimicry going on. Do you know what I'm saying? And now within that, because jazz is so much deeper than just wearing a hat, there are innovations and different pushing of different traditions that happen here. So I'm sort of discovering what their traditions are, but also keeping myself firmly rooted in our tradition and informing my students and the people around me that, hey, no, there's this tradition. This is where it comes from. Of course we can play, trap. Of course we can play these things. And bringing it back to Khalil, and I'll go back to where I just was. Khalil's the man that brought that to me. Like, he's the one that showed me what the tradition was. Like, he's the one that put me on in the soil, and started my roots digging in the soil. So everything I discover, everything that I find, it's informed by how he planted me in the earth of this music. Do you understand what I'm saying? So
Totally.
my entire view is informed by how he showed me to look at it. Because Khalil was all over the place too. He wasn't a purist, and I think in that sense, a purist isn't a purist, because if you're so pure, like one of the phenomenal musicians we have in this world, who's a very New York purist on what is and what isn't jazz. I think you invalidate yourself from the tradition. I think that's what you do. If you're so pure that you crystallize what something is and what it isn't, you're no longer in it. Right. Because life is moving, and as soon as you fix it like that, it's dead. You're figuratively beating a dead horse. And so one of the things that I try to do, especially with my students, is remove these artificial walls that say gospel ends here, and then the blues is over here, and then R&B is here, and then there's pop, and then jazz is sort of here, because it's not like that. It never was like that. It never was. All the music comes from the same family of people. It all comes from blues and ring shots. So there's a bit of gospel, and there's tons of gospel and R&B. There's tons of R&B, and even the most postmodern music. It's all influenced by each other. So these walls are fake. And one of the things that I try to tell people around here is that those walls come from outside of the music. So they're not intrinsic in the music. Do you know what I mean? And a lot of the names come from outside of the music, like jazz and bebop come from outside of the music, technically. But my whole sort of experience here in Europe, being removed from the tradition, has sort of solidified and crystallized my understanding of how dynamic, flowing, and living the tradition really is, while I'm still rooted in it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So, for example, we'll go through some bebop with my students, and then the next thing we'll play is some Michael Jackson from the 80s, and then the next thing we'll do is we'll be talking about trap. Like, that's all in my rep course. We do that, and then we're going to go back and talk about second line, and we're going to talk about some other things. The Purdy Shuffle is where we are now. Do you know? So it's like, I'm really trying to show them that, no, the tradition is all spidered in. It's not just, this is jazz and this is not.
That's a great way to describe it, though. I mean, or to teach it, I should say, because, yeah, man, I think about so many jazz courses and the way, like, it can get passed down is it's just like, okay, you did this tune, you did this set of changes. Now we're going to move to this set of changes. Where I feel like, if anything, the more I study jazz, the more I teach it, the more I realize it has the changes in understanding harmony and that side of the Western system is super important on a lot of levels. However, it isn't necessarily the essence of what we do. I think on a deeper level, there's a spirit and kind of a mutual understanding every musician has about the way this thing works, and how that it's just really it's a form of communication.
Most definitely a living form of communication.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I mean, I agree. Khalil definitely, man. I remember he would just show. It was so weird for me, like as a kid, taking lessons with him too. I mean, or like going to Oaktown and getting lessons with, he'd show me the melodies and just be like, "This is the melody. Can you hear it? Do you remember it? Great. This is your harmony part, because you play trombone. It's gonna sound weird. I mean, it's not gonna sound weird, but we don't need to play octaves. You can do something else," and just like getting up there. And then I remember a few times he did that on a gig, like 5 minutes before a gig too. He just threw
I
us,
still remember some of those moments.
just threw us in the fire. But and that's kind of how it goes. But yeah, prepared. Definitely, it was a great preparation for life.
Yeah,
Not just music, but life.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
maybe you can also speak to this too, because man, I always forget this, man. You're an Obi.
yeah.
Yeah, man. We went different eras. We went, but the same hang, same school, pretty much. And you had Wendell, man. I
Yeah.
had him for 1 year, and then it was weird. He passed away, and I remember like 2 weeks before he passed away, it was like the last week of school. I was practicing in one of the rooms in the new building they built, and he comes over to me and he says, "Baron, I want to talk to you, man. Find me." And I was like, "Okay, find me later, but I want to talk to you." I was like, "Okay," and it was like like not like a reprimand. It was like, I want to like work with you. Let's talk. And never. And then that happened. And then he passed away. And so I
Mm,
never got to talk to him about what he wanted to talk about. But
mm.
it was a little weird. But maybe you could speak to your experience with Wendell and doing the Overland, man. I want to hear about this.
I am truly lucky to have met Khalil,
Yes.
and the trajectory that he set me on led me right to Wendell, because both of those two guys, first of all, they're both from the street. Like Wendell, I had Marcus Belgrave, I had Kenny Davis, we
Oh,
had Donald Walden there, we had, who else did we have? Billy Hart. Like
Billy.
not only were they high level musicians, but they were cats from the street. And what I mean by that is they're from the tradition. They grew up in the tradition. So that's one of those things. All the people that came through the school um, during that, especially during that Wendell era of things, he built the jazz department. We all have a different view. I think it's more vibrant. I think it's a deeper view of what the tradition is, because you can't get through that school without knowing so much about the tradition. Like my experience at that school was an integral part, very integral part in who I am now. It continued, like I said, it continued what Khalil set in me, and it continued to um, birth in me this sense of tradition, this sense of where the music comes from and what it really is, and what it isn't, which is that crystallization thing.
Sure, sure. But yeah, man, I love that point you make too, just about kind of combining it all. But I think too, within it, what we talked about earlier at the beginning of the conversation, how we use the internet and how we kind of set, using these new platforms, these new platforms to kind of shape how we express ourselves, and as well as just like use that to kind of push things forward. Maybe you talk so much about like kind of that element. I mean, just how you think about posting, you think about doing this, the practical stuff. But maybe if you ever thought about it in those terms of just like kind of how this tradition, seeing it in line with what we do as jazz musicians, using the internet like that. Have you ever thought about it in those terms? And if so, maybe we could talk a bit about that too. I want to hear your
Hmm.
thoughts on this.
Just in terms of using the internet and how that changes, and like how
Well,
things get around.
like the way I really mean this, and I guess the way I kind of think about it is the same way, a jazz artist combines, elements of hip hop as well as, you talk about teaching like teaching a bebop head at the same time, and then kind of following that up with something kind of coming more out of R&B and then trap music. That was the example you used. I'm
Hmm.
curious I'm curious what your thoughts are about also including, the ideas of just using how we use that on Instagram, or how how we might kind of, I guess, what am I trying to say? How we would kind of use what goes on the internet also to kind of incorporate that into what we do. Like
Right,
I know it's a platform, and it kind of
right,
is like a plate where we eat it off of, but like how, I mean, the plate is also part of the dish too. I mean,
right,
you can't deny
right. Right. And I think using that analogy, one of the cool things about how things are working is if you're hip to the right restaurants or hip to the right chefs, you'll see some things where somebody will serve you a plate of some like African chebujap with some greens, you know, or some beignets from New Orleans, you know, kind of breaks down because that sounds a little funny. But what I'm saying is, not only is the internet a place where we serve these things, but it's also a place where we are served these things from all over the place. There's never been a time in history when the world was more accessible by the internet. So you have these killers that are dropping these things where you can hear the influence from different places, right? So it helps us break down those walls, and it helps us push the music and the art forward. Like, for example, this is an old example, but I remember when I learned what Chris Dave was, like the monster that he was. It's like, okay, yeah, I know Chris Dave from that sort of Dilla beat type of thing and all that world that he's created, which is amazing. But I didn't know that was him with Kenny on Standard of Language. Like, I didn't know that this album that is swinging like hell is him too, you know? So it's like, oh, okay, here's this thing where this guy, you know, doesn't seem to respect this artificial wall that we've separated between like the Dilla stuff and, or, you know, that hip hop side to the purist jazz side. And then you got artists like Roy Hargrove that did the same thing. Like Roy is steeped in the tradition, but then he came out with RH Factor early 2000s, and you're like, oh wait, D'Angelo, that's what we're doing. It's like, oh, okay. And it blurs those lines. It helps us blur the lines, which in reality were always blurred or were never really there. Do you know what I mean? And so I feel like today, with the speed at which we can get and consume and reflect information, I think it's a ripe opportunity for more of that, more of these challenges that come across where people are sharing, hey, this is my take on it. What's your take? Oh, okay, I'm going to be influenced by your take on it, and now I'm going to have a new take. Do you know what I mean? Definitely. So in that sense, now I have a lot of hope for where we are now.
Cool, man. Perfect. I'm gonna ask. I'm gonna pull it back for 1 second, back to the current situation we're dealing with now.
Okay.
We're all inside. Um, hopefully. Maybe someone's watching this on their phone walking down the street, but whatever. Anyway, I hope not. But I want to ask, what have you done, if anything, to prepare, as on the question sheet? So I got to ask it. I'm always curious to hear what people are doing to prepare, because, you know, there's some practice. I mean, we don't really know how long this thing will last, you know, or how long the government mandates will last where they're asking us to stay inside. And, you know, some people, obviously, you know, you don't see toilet paper in the stores all the time. So it feels like people are buying it. I don't know. Everybody I talk to is pretty cool with toilet paper, and they're not stressing about it. So that's, right. Or they're lying about it, which is cool too. But, I mean, but,
it's less cool if you shake their hand.
Yeah. That
social distance.
Man, I'm wearing gloves like when I open my house door, like to, you know, the house, my apartment building. I'm like, all right, that glove goes on, that knob gets pressed, push, glove comes off, goes in pocket, walk away.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to ask, like, what are some things you're doing to prepare, and just different stuff going on
to prepare for the current situation, or to prepare for once we come out?
What have you done to prepare for now, and what do you think, and going forward, what do you see yourself needing to also kind of get done / prepare?
Okay, I've done nothing to prepare for now because it just came out of nowhere. I think we're just kind of floating along with this thing. I'm lucky to be in a position where I'm okay. You know, I'm not dying. I have food. You know, I know how to cook, and you know, I prepare meals for myself, and I'm good.
Yes.
What can we do as musicians? I was talking with my friend about this, a fellow musician. What can we do to prepare for what's going to be when we get out of there, when we get out of the confinement? Because our industry is completely ransacked by this thing. Like, no live concerts. That's what we did. You know what I mean? And even the teaching that we do, we can't, like, I can't teach my class because the school's closed. So how can we prepare for something that we don't know what it's going to be? And we were talking about like what could it be? It could be a situation where there are just no gigs because, you know, people don't have it, and it's sort of a desert situation, so we're all kind of scrounging around trying to figure out how we're going to make ends meet after the confinement ends. um or it could be a situation where it's like people are getting out of there and they're done with digital music. Like their Spotify has been played to death, YouTube has been played to death, you know, Instagram, they've already heard that. They want to hear live music that speaks to them in the moment and communicates with them, because they miss us and we miss them. So it might be a situation where it's like a flood. There's tons of gigs all over the place, and we're trying to figure out, we're trying to scramble our schedules together, you know? A
Mm-hmm.
lot of the gigs that we had that were bigger name gigs, like the festival things, have been pushed back. Some pushed back to 2021. And it's like, what is it going to be? Are we going to be way too busy? Or are we going to be like not busy at all? So I don't know. But I'm doing the one thing that I can do, and that's practice all of my instruments so that when I come out of this confinement, I'm sharp and I'm able to adapt to any kind of a musical situation that occurs.
I think that's the most beautiful way to put it. One of the more beautiful answers I've heard for sure. In doing these. And as I do at the end of every interview, I shower the person I'm interviewing with compliments.
Oh no.
But everybody loves compliments, so but I'll say this about you, Josiah, man. You're like I remember Feather River when I was young enough to act like I knew something, but definitely not old enough to know what I acted like I knew. And man, you were just like, you were cool as hell. You were just like, yep, okay, have fun with that. Yeah, uh huh. But you were also, man, I remember you would lead the brass class, man. You showed me, you were teaching. I never really seen anybody just be able to like, you know, I, I hadn't had as many examples of people like just being able to fluently play their instrument and do
Mm,
it in such a way where it was just very much a part of them. And
mm.
that's you for sure. Additionally, too, just explaining it very practically. You know, like in a lot of ways, man, yeah, the example you kind of showed is a lot of how, you know, I teach now and how I think a lot of people who teach our music teach it now, with this very just one to one relating to our students, not trying to like talk down to them, not talking to them like, you know, we know something that they don't, but really just explaining to them politely, you know, this is the music, this is what it is. And that's something I've always seen from you, man. And additionally too, your work ethic, it's second to none, man. I remember you were working out guitar back then, and I was like, why is he playing guitar? He's a trumpet player. I don't get it. What is it? Yeah, he can play. Yeah, go. And then, you know, my 13, 14-year-old self. And now I'm like, dude, I remember you were putting in hours on that thing. And now it's like, you know, next level. I'm hitting the guard. But, you know, it's also true too, man. You're just like someone too who, man, on top of all of it, you know, like all the great musicians we all know, and or most of them, man, just you have such a pure heart, man, and such a pure
Oh,
soul when it comes to this stuff. And it comes out through your music, it comes out in the way you play, it comes out in like almost everything you do, man. And to me that's just, it's a blessing. It's a blessing to reconnect with you. It's a blessing to hear you talk on these subjects, and I'm grateful, you know, grateful to know you, man.
well, I appreciate all those words, and I got to pass all that on to Khalil, really, because all that's coming from him. You know, his musicianship that he taught me, the way that he taught me in our lessons. I kind of kind of made it a little bit softer, because he was
Yeah.
a little bit more than I am. But yeah, it all comes from him. And remember, Khalil played drums and bass too, so like
Yeah,
all that stuff comes from where he was. And so I'm happy to hear those things and happy to understand that he was able to transmit those things to me, and hopefully I'm able to transmit those things to other people to keep that thing going.
definitely, man. With that, I'm gonna